Well, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Bruin Troop Heritage Farm. My name is TJ Molaski. I'm the Executive Director here at the Maplewood Area Historical Society. I want to thank you all for coming and supporting our event tonight, Let's Talk About Ukraine. As an historian, history isn't just things that happened 100 years ago, right? History's happening right now, and we get to talk about that tonight with a very important person. It's not just old stuff. It's what happens and how we relate to it on a daily level. So I'm really proud that we're able to present this program tonight. Tonight's guest is Dr. Irina Fersman. She's a chief facilitator and OD practitioner for Hugh Life, an organization development and facilitation firm that focuses on human understanding and engagement as a core strategy for change. You brought with you tonight your husband, Richard, and I think Richard wants to come up and say some stuff. So
I thought I would give you just a little background first of where the story starts. So this is a picture of me right after I got back from the Arctic Circle in 1981 and was being congratulated for lifting ship morale. I was a meteorologist on board the USS Fairfax County, but it was in the Barents Sea. We went above Nord Cape, Norway, the northernmost point of Europe, and settled in around Murmansk, where we were visited by a large fleet of Soviet ships. The job up there was to monitor ship traffic, monitor radio traffic, monitor sub-traffic. You see an Alpha-class submarine there on the left. We made it all the way up to the ice pack and were followed constantly. I guess we had constant Soviet surveillance, and obviously we took pictures of them as well. And so this was a start during the Cold War, the height of the Cold War. This was right after the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets, which led ultimately to their, part of what led to the collapse. And on that Alpha fast attack submarine that was following our ship was Irina's uncle.
So now I'll bring us back to where my journey began. You said something, TJ, about history and the importance of history and noticing it today. What's happening today will become history tomorrow and years to come. And it will depend who is telling that history, what we will learn and what we will know. So my journey began on the military base, so that's what we have in common. I grew up on a base that was secret based at the time. Nobody could come in or leave. So it was 10,000 or so strangers. On that particular base, we were strangers who became big family. It was very visible when somebody visits. You can tell by the color of their skin they were not white enough, because 9 months of the year it was snow on the ground. So that's eastern part of Siberia. And what we have done as a family is really be dedicated to serving the state, right? We were all growing up, as you can see pictures of somewhere in there, in the big group, myself, and then with my sister and my mom on the left, really being intentional and focused on ideology around communism. So at age 7, you're becoming an aktyabrenok, which is your first step. At age 14, you're becoming a pioneer is the next step. Then you're becoming a komsomolets, and after that, you're becoming a communist. And as a good kid, is what is expected of you, to grow into the system and take the responsibilities within the party system so you can be part of the greater Soviet Union. So what you're hearing at the top, Slava Sovetskому Soyuzu, is a slogan we all grew up with, and we're pretty proud being citizens of Soviet Union. With that, we're also very much on the side of Americans are evil. And so the image of United States, for me, especially growing up in that area and with military surroundings, it was constant. Every Wednesday morning, we will be doing news briefings all about United States soldiers elsewhere in the world, occupying other countries, so to speak, is what we would learn, and horrific images that we were shown as kids. So that image continued on to develop until pop culture showed up in our life. Just like it changed America, it started changing our minds as well. So my father, unfortunately, did not survive the collapse of Soviet Union. He was a 36-year-old major who got caught in the chaos of the Soviet Union collapse, which meant when you're in the military on a base like this with planes and weapons that could be sold, you might be in the way of some of those processes that were happening. So we found him dead one morning in our apartment building. And most people have suffered or knew somebody who lost everything, who lost their family members during that collapse. It was not a good time. And many blamed Gorbachev for that. The reforms and glasnost was not well received during that difficult time. So what we did is we ended up taking a long journey from Far East to back to where my mom is from, Crimea, at the time Ukraine. So Trans-Siberian, 7 days on train, mostly nuts and chocolate was our diet. So you can see from one part of Soviet Union to another, I can't remember how many kilometers, 9,781 kilometers trip. It was the longest train ride I've ever taken in my life. I don't think I want to take a train ride anywhere else, although there is one more coming up on my journey. So I am Russian first. That's my native language. My father was Russian. My mom was Ukrainian, but affiliated more with Russian culture. We spoke Russian at home. We were Slava Sovetskому Soyuzu type of family, serving the state. During the crisis, everybody's minds got messed up. Everybody was asking themselves the question, why is it happening? Who did this to us? What is now? So we're taking this long trip to Ukraine as mostly pro-Russian minded individuals. And now in Crimea, learning about very different mentality, very different way of life, much more diverse society, much more educated society. It's not a closed military base anymore when you're programmed in one way. I ended up going to University of Simferopol, where I got my master's degree in mathematics and computer science. Second in my family to go to college. First person was my mom's oldest sister. That was also during the time when the educational system was under reform. And what that meant is first year when they started implementing private schools. Before that, everything was state-run, state-managed, and free for citizens. Healthcare, education. So this is a year when, okay, if you want to go to school, you have to pay for it. A very new, novel concept for people who never had to pay for water or for education or for dental appointments. So we were all learning what it's like to now actually put value to things like education. If you want to go to school, you have to come up with some money. So as we were learning all that, I ended up getting a stipend just because I'm very smart. I'm going to school in the profession that was new. Information technology was just being introduced in 1993, this is. So my computer that I worked on was big, floppy disks and all that stuff. MS-DOS is what we used to program at the time. 2 girls, 80 boys as a class, so it was very much man-dominated industry. But being in that environment, learning something new along the side with others who are just learning this, created an equal environment, so to speak, because there wasn't traditional hierarchy yet created. However, getting to know people who lived and who in Simferopol, city of Simferopol, which is 350,000 population, compared to, again, 10,000 on the military base. What that meant is I got connected with the families that much more better off, educated families, understanding aristocrat, so to speak, way of life, and the values of those who value education. So this is what I contribute to, just the first exposure of what it means to live in an educated environment and how important education is, both to development, creativity, but also the responsibilities that we take as a result of that. So that's one part of my life, but the rest of my family continued to be a big part of my life and lived, most of them, in the village, small village in Crimea. I was the only one living in a big city because I went to school. But everybody else is on that little farm that used to be a collective farm, and you can see my grandma in the bottom picture. My grandma survived World War II, and she would tell us stories about the village being invaded by Germans and then by Russians. And it will go back and forth multiple times during the 4-year period. And she preferred Germans over Russians. And I didn't understand that at the time. So we just laughed it off, didn't really go too deep into it. What I learned later, especially when Richard started asking questions, is that how German soldiers treated villagers and paid for what they took versus Russians didn't pay. They just took everything they could from the citizens. So that's where the image started to shift for me too, what it means to be at war and how people treat civilians when they're at war as states. I had my child at 21, and Sasha was in this picture, 1 year old, on the right side. So having a kid changes their life too. So now I'm still in school, finishing up last year, having a kid and trying to figure out how am I going to support myself, my child, and my mom and my sister were also dependent on me. So I went to school and I did some odd jobs, anywhere from selling bags on the street when I'm not teaching or not in school, to money exchange kiosks on the weekend. And teaching jobs were paid $20 a month at that point in time. So that's why at some point I decided, you know what, I need to start looking for a partner. And I found one on Match.com.
Match.communist.
Yeah. So Richard and I started writing on New Year's Eve of 2002. So 2022, we are celebrating our 20th anniversary. But this was the second train trip from Crimea with my family, and you can see mostly women. That's typical in Russian-Ukrainian society. A lot more women than men. And at that time in Crimea, the ratio was 1 to 3. And so this was December. I arrived to Maplewood on December 18. Chief Lukin was at the airport meeting us and taking us back to Oak River is where we lived first before we moved to Maplewood. So you can see the journey now to Maplewood. We had our wedding in community center in Maplewood with some actors trying to break into our wedding. So there are some stories to tell about that experience, which led to a question from my family first. How are you doing in terms of how is your financial well-being? Struggling. Richard has 5 kids, or together now between, here's our now new family, 4 kids from first marriage, 1 kid from Ukraine. So we have family of 5 and 1 person working, really. The other one doesn't even speak English yet. And it wasn't easy. My family did not believe us because to have a government job meant corrupt and wealthy. Didn't happen here. But I wanted to understand why, what's the difference, how does it work? And so that sparked the curiosity, and I started getting I think I stuck my nose into many different businesses, but I really wanted to understand how local government works. And so knowing Mike and others in the profession was very helpful to really learn the dedication to public service. That wasn't something that was common in my home country, neither Ukraine or Russia, and the type of people who choose to go in that service. So that began my quest on understanding what does it look like if I go back to Ukraine and bring these principles back to Ukraine, because it just did not change. And what allowed us to do that work is the firing of Richard from Maplewood. We both sat down and decided, hey, something wrong went here. Community engagement came up as one of those elements that either can go really well or really badly for you. So when you need to make decisions like development and you're not in tune or don't know the temperature of the community, that's what happens. And so we started looking at that and learning from that experience. Lots of mistakes, lots of good stuff, lots of lessons learned, and decided to form what we at the time called Global Synergy Group as a consulting company. So it didn't become nonprofit until later. But it was the idea to change one community at a time by engaging in conversations early, understanding the temperature, understanding what people's needs are, so you can get ahead and start partnering with those who need to make decisions around different projects within the community. So that year, 2008, also recession happened. So our business really didn't take off. So we decided, well, let's do something in Ukraine then. So we started going to Ukraine with some of our colleagues and convened multiple events. Got to know community leaders in Ukraine, students, teachers. You were in school at the time. I was interpreting for Richard and for others who were part of the cohort in Ukraine. So through that experience, we formed partnerships with multiple community leaders in Ukraine, educators, and nonprofits, which is who we're working with today. So this is 10 years ago, 2012. Our first conversation about strategic work at the time was really all focused on, we all want to change Ukrainian communities and people wanted to be living by Western standards. They were tired of being the people, I'm talking about, not the government yet. We're tired of living under the same regime and not quite integrating with Western Europe at the time. So we started having those conversations and started comparing American values, Ukrainian values. What does it mean to be a democratic society? Getting involved with teachers so they can talk to kids differently, making connections with Rotary clubs and other civic groups so that we can bring more people into public service, so to speak, sphere. Learning about cultures so we can appreciate more rather than talk about what divides us. And as a result, we had sister city formation, we had county relationships built, and University of Minnesota student, Natalia, who was here on the Fulbright Scholarship. You will see her picture here on the left or right. Really insisted on working with youth because it was clear that the kind of change and the kind of mindset we need and the kind of leadership we need we need to start introducing that earlier in our kids. So we focused a few years then later on developing youth, anywhere from 13-year-olds to 17-year-olds who came here to the United States. And they got to experience civic life. They got to live in the homes of mayors and police chiefs. And they got to watch Mayor Hopkins walk down the hallway and pick up a piece of paper and put it in the garbage, and then that's all they talked about next day. They couldn't believe that the mayor would do that or clean up after a party. So this service mindset is what we were going after, especially for those children and young adults who were kind of positioning themselves already to go into leadership roles because of their connections and family.
We continued to go back to Ukraine with training. We continued to provide exchange opportunities, and some additional council members from those sister city relationships came here. And when they came here last trip, it was 2013. When they were here, the invasion began in Ukraine. When first Russian attack on East Ukraine and then invasion of Crimea. And so you see some quotes here. It was very raw, it was painful as they were talking about governance and democracy here. Their country was experiencing an attack. And what was happening is the mindset of those council members, those individuals, shifted on our eyes. They were critically looking at, why do Americans pay taxes? And why do Americans do service? And so we had deeper discussions about personal responsibilities and what the role of government would be then. And so Vladimir Pilichuk is no longer alive, but he died from COVID, not war related, but he was one of those voices that still rings in my ears today, is an example of, I think early 70s, I don't know exactly how old he was when he was here, but deciding that I'm Ukrainian now, and we're gonna start build Ukrainian democracy, and the pride that he had in his voice, and the determination to go back home and do governing differently. It was pretty inspiring at the time.
There are going to be images up here that are disturbing. To understand Ukrainian mindset, you have to understand that you go back to the Holodomor where 1932-33, anywhere up to 7 million Ukrainians were starved to death during the collectivization period under Stalin. At the height of it, 10 to 25,000 people a day were dying and being carted off. And so they actually had assignments of people to go in horse carts and collect dead bodies and put them in mass graves. We jump ahead. This after we've been married for a couple of years and Orange Revolution started. That was the first sort of push towards independence, break away from the old way of thinking. The Orange Revolution ended up, you can see the poisoning that, don't know if you remember that, but the leading opposition candidate was poisoned. Yanukovych was president at that time. He ended up losing the election, and the Orange Revolution failed because the system had not rid itself of corruption yet. You fast forward 10 years to 2014, what Irina was talking about, and you have the Maidan. That was when Yanukovych told the European Union that Ukraine was not going to join, and there was a revolution, a peaceful revolution in Kyiv. That's when Yanukovych forces, police came and fired on the protesters, killed 100 people. The entire city erupted in the protests. Yanukovych ended up fleeing. This is what Kiev looked like. You can kind of see what it would look like normally and what it looked like during the protests. Yanukovych left, and the new government came in, and that's when, right after the Olympics, if you remember, Olympics and Putin don't go well for Ukraine, but invaded, took over Crimea, and started the war in Donbass. Kind of split. These are the Russian-speaking areas that Putin had his eye on back in 2014. He got pushed back and contained in Luhansk and Donetsk, and Simferopol, which is blue down below. There were, at the time, pro-Russian protests. We decided at that time, with over 1 million people displaced and protests going on, that we needed to have a peace summit. Irina and I put together a proposal, sent that into Kyiv to hold a peace summit for people around the country of different, both Russian-speaking and Ukrainian-speaking, to talk about the future of the country.
Can you pause here for a second?
Yeah.
Because that's important. The conflict that was at the time real and present is a language conflict, which was instigated and orchestrated by Kremlin, again, to divide people internally. So the idea and the point was to get past that barrier, past that, and come together and speak English so we can start building our bridges beyond and recognize that what's happening is intentional to divide us. So let's put it aside and talk about the real issues and not focus on the language issue.
So overall, it was a pretty good success. Going into it, we didn't know what we were doing, so which I would encourage anybody, if you're going to do something, don't know what you're getting into, otherwise you'll never do it. So that's one thing I would encourage. We didn't have money. Irina and I were funding most of it. There are competing organizations in there. There's a whole new peace industry we discovered, and questions of readiness of participants for the subject. But ultimately, we had one fist fight, ended in a bloody nose, and that was it. And so overall, it was peaceful. New ideas, and I thought I would throw this slide in there because you can see Maplewood up there. I was giving a presentation about how local government units work together. Something Mike and I know very well about, how you coordinate things in an emergency, for example. Both state, local, federal, all of these units working together. And individual from Poland also was giving an example for people to follow. What was experienced there, all voices were honored. They discovered shared values. It didn't matter which part of Ukraine you were from. Everybody wanted the same thing. Everybody valued the same thing. They wanted a place to raise families. They wanted a place to live in peace. They ended up having the same kind of joys, same kind of sorrows, same kind of fears, and all this was discovered in the dialogue. Our vision question was, what kind of country do we want to live in when the war is over? That was their job, to put that together, and they put together their principles of peace, principles of constructing their country, of how they wanted to be governed. Those were sent to the president, interim president at the time. People took individual actions into their account, talked about their personal commitments that they wanted to make sure that they would get off the ground. Each person who came to the Peace Summit had to make a personal commitment of what they were going to do. You couldn't just come and participate. You had to carry out an assignment when you left. You agreed to that principle when you came in. These public statements to act were very clear, and it's incredible when people put their voice out there that they will follow through on it. Promises at the end. This was made in honor of the Peace Summit.
Part of the purpose of the event was to bridge the language issue, but also to treat everybody as an equal player in this conversation. So partnerships among a governor and a student leader, right? Student rep and an IT company. Just nobody typically in the same room. Doesn't happen very often at this type of event, in this type of environment. So those who came really wanted change happen. Those who came were the champions then. And it was happening right during the European Union deciding to fund decentralization reform in Ukraine and put in some strings attached to that funding. So what happened here is people saw what they can do to help this decentralization reform roll out in different communities. So that launched 2014 and continued for the next 8 years in terms of reforming how government structure worked and getting past that fear that people had in terms of, we had one czar, now we'll have 25 czars. How is it going to look like? A lot of skepticism. And not really believing that people would do good out of public good rather than serve themselves. So that's what this was about. And it worked. We had 20-some facilitators who then continued on this work and followed up with all the regions. There are 25 regions total in Ukraine. So each region then was practicing same approach and getting communities involved in collaboration on those local action plans. So making anything local is the key, whether it's a personal family or local at the community level in context of a bigger picture. So that's what we learned then, and making sure that the experience is also the feelings, the relationships that are built, the trust that's built in the process is not overlooked, because people can do a lot more when they trust each other. So we had to make space for that. So shared values, experience, tools is what allowed that
decentralization reform to take place. And the reverse was kind of happening. And we were all in a high. In fact, we decided our work is done. And we're gonna roll back Global Synergy Group. We don't need that nonprofit anymore. We're gonna focus on the next challenge for us here in the United States, and then continue to work with youth. So we did have some youth trips back and forth for a couple more years. Cities like Brooklyn Park chimed in, as the school district wanted to do something, but it also became more about American youth and less about Ukrainian youth. It was a beautiful partnership that was emerging between young people. They started developing their own plans. We no longer even supported or helped them with their own international youth forum. It was kind of happening on their own. They continued to do this. And now we are in 2022. Nobody anticipated that. When the conversation started in early February, and a lot of people were calling and asking, do you think it's really gonna happen? I said, yeah, I believe it's gonna happen. And then I started checking in with our colleagues and friends and saying, what are you guys doing? How are you preparing? Are you planning on leaving? Oh, no, it's not gonna happen. They did not believe it's gonna happen. Nobody believed it's gonna happen. But it did, and so why did it happen? And my answer to that, it's not Russian-Ukraine war. It's ideological war. It's a power struggle war. This is between democracy and Ukraine experiencing freedom and democracy in the last 8 years and not ready to give it up. And people would rather die than go back to what it used to be. They said no to Vladimir Putin twice, in 2004, in 2014. They're saying no again, and it pisses him off. He doesn't like to be told no. And he's going to continue to use citizens as a shield. He's going to continue to terrorize population until he gets what he wants. And Ukrainians know that. And so now it's all about survival. As many people as we can get out and save is what our job is. Then we're going to start healing process. We can't expect that Russian and Ukrainians are going to be enemies. We're not. We have families, joint families. There's many people like me who are both Russian and Ukrainian. In fact, I became more Ukrainian in the United States than I was ever Ukrainian living in Crimea. So healing is going to be a harder job to achieve. With my own family, I don't have peace yet. We are not talking right now. They do not believe that this is happening to Ukrainian people and it is being caused by Russian military. They strongly believe that it's the West, the free world, so to speak, that is creating this condition in which poor Russian people in Ukraine suffer. So when you see the green corridors are being blocked and bombed, this strategy there is so that people will be exhausted enough, they will give up and they'll accept the corridors will go to Russia. And that's what the Russian government wants. So in Crimea, there's many refugees right now that have been redirected to Crimea, that my family tells me they're okay. They're being treated well. They believe that they want to be there, and I hear the other side from those who have trusted relationship with me or my colleagues who are asking, can you please get me out? And so that issue is going to be really hard to deal with, and this is where we will find ourselves back in the business trying to help. Because we're not the type of group that has the capacity, nor is it our place to rebuild infrastructure after it's all over, which will be difficult. We are going to continue to focus on rebuilding people, connections, healing between Russia and Ukraine. So what we're doing right now is trying to save as many people as we can. These are all individuals that we're working with directly, helping directly. So those students that were 13, 15-year-old coming to Minnesota 10 years ago are your 23, 25, 27-year-olds who are mayors, who are administrators, lawyers and teachers, business owners, who decide, not everybody, but those who decide to stay back need our help. They don't have a regular job anymore. Well, if they're in government, that's a full-time job to maintain safety and security to the degree they can within their own community. And many kind of communications gurus now, because they've learned the power of direct communication, which means every morning you tune into what mayor has to say about the situation in my community. So imagine Maplewood. Sirens is a normal thing. There is not a day that goes by that it's quiet. People tune in, like in the old days, to radio to listen to what mayor has to say is going to happen today, what's available in humanitarian aid, where to expect perhaps activities, where to go when to get water or medicine. And people who are left volunteering to coordinate and deliver primarily. Women don't drive. It's still a society where, well, not many women drive. So there's a huge reliance on men to drive, to fight, and also to be medics and emergency management, firefighters and so forth. So it's dire situation. And helping those communities, especially rural communities. Bigger cities have different, both connections, resources, and humanitarian aid gets there faster. Rural communities, it's a very different story. Nothing gets there.
And by the way, I just wanted to say that all the pictures up here are a result of Irina's work there. So everybody that we've been able to get money to have been directly in contact with us asking for relief, whether it be food, shelter, medical communications. We call it dignity, which is just your sanitation, comfort, and transit. And so all these pictures are from money, or people who receive money from us doing reports back to Irina.
Yeah, so basically we became a conduit to fundraising funds in the United States and transferring it to Ukraine next day. So by 2 p.m., whatever is in our bank is getting transferred to their account so they can immediately purchase what they need. And needs change every day in every community. So on Saturday, it was, I found a spot where I can transport 31 kids from an orphan. Can you get me a microwave? Yeah, we can figure out how to get a microwave. Why? Because humanitarian aid does not provide refrigerators, microwaves, or stoves, right? So Sergey got a package of frozen chicken, and what to do with it? You can't cook it without utensils. And when things are bombed and you live in the house, all you're bringing with you is what you can carry. And he's been taking care of a lot of orphans all his life, and now because people know him, they just drop kids at his doorstep, and that's what he's doing, transporting group after group after group to safe places. So on Saturday, I got the kids, I need the microwave. Today it is, the bridge got destroyed. We're no longer gonna get supplies here, so we need to quickly figure out how to purchase enough for at least a month, because it's not gonna be restored in the next month. So that's kind of how we operate right now, reacting to immediate needs that are there and trying to support both financially, but also networking and helping them connect resources internally within the country and Poland. And the next piece is going to be really this intermediate period when we're ready to start going back and thinking about mental health, thinking about psychological support. Have a group of psychologists going through training today, tomorrow, 4 days in a row, getting ready, counselors, to start working with refugees and misplaced people within Ukraine. But the biggest need right now are women and teenage girls who've been raped, and it's a hard work for them. So we need to help support them so they can do the hard work and help their communities. And when it gets to rebuilding, this is when we're going to come back to Maplewood and other communities and organizations in the United States and bluntly start asking for help in terms of connecting community to community, organization to organization relationships, because that's when the biggest difference happens. It's when you have a friend who cares. If there is a community in Minnesota who cares about community in Ukraine, then you can make those friendships meaningful. Not necessarily money, it's just knowing that you have somebody who cares and you can bring your kids and they can bring their kids and show what this looks like and how we live and survive. Moral support is just as important in this case. So that's kind of our plan. Continue to help with immediate needs now, as long as needed. Second is to prepare for supporting communities with restoring the soul. And then third one is connecting the organizations and communities with each other so they can start rebuilding going forward. So here is our Global Synergy Group website for your information if you're curious, if you want to see what activities that are happening in the groups and initiatives that we're supporting, please visit us and find out more. One of most recent activities I'll just share, very simple, goes with dignity. Mother's Day is coming up. And so what we're trying to do is to organize a campaign where we can raise funds for beauticians, people in beauty industry in Ukraine who've lost not only their jobs, of course, but everything else that goes with it, and help purchase the equipment for them so they can do manicures on Mother's Day in shelters in Ukraine. So things like that matters. You know, sending over $1,000 would support that group for a month. It goes long ways. Number one, pay attention. Don't let that slip from the mind of your regular day. I know it's hard to be in it all the time, but being aware is important because when the time comes and we need to make some connections, right? It's important to stay in touch. If you can help financially, please do. There's plenty of organizations that are doing great work. On our website, you can see a whole list of good nonprofit organizations that are specifically focused on specific needs, and I told you our story. So if you trust us, please help us out. And then later on, as I said, making more intentional community to community, industry to industry,
Rotary to Rotary.
Rotary to Rotary connections will help rebuild, and making that part of healing process with Russia, because it's going to be very important with Russian people.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.